Well, I got 6:30. We're still waiting for the applicant to show up, but the first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the September 17th, 2024 meeting.
When you say the applicant, you mean my lawyer?
Yes. Yeah. Josh. Yeah. Does everybody reviewed the minutes? Any changes, suggested modifications or anything?
No changes.
I'll entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
I second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. Okay. The next item on the agenda is the Yadgar application is scheduled for a public hearing this evening. Mr. Yadgar is here, but we're going to wait a couple minutes for his attorney to show up.
Just with him, so he should be here in a second.
Okay.
I don't see a lot. So my trail cams are showing 0 bucks. That'll change.
Yes.
I'm just asking you. Otherwise, yeah. See, I'm not sure what it is.
Mr. Mackey's here. Okay, we handled the minutes. The next matter on the agenda is a scheduled public hearing for Yadgard located at 610 Stanford Road, seeking for variances, 3 area variances and 1 variance for lot coverage. Mr. Mackey, it's not for a public hearing, but to establish a record, you want to give a brief introduction of the application?
Sure. All right, you want me to come up there?
Yeah, you can come on up.
Okay. So this application is now 25 months in the making. It's taken on various forms. The most recent one was submitted actually last year at this time, October 31st. You're right, there are 3 variances under consideration. As you know, it's a pool by now. The first variance requests a rear yard variance. The variance is calling for 40 foot from the back boundary line, whereas a 75-foot setback is required. The second variance is a side yard setback, 100 feet is required, and the proposed front edge of the pool will be 90.8 feet away from the side property. The third variance that we're requesting is lot coverage. So this current iteration, it's a 35 by 15 pool on a lot that is 1.74 acres. The pool itself uh, it's 525 square feet. And I think this gets a little bit complicated. I can go into it, but the calculations of lot coverage have been discussed also in our October 31st, 2023 application. I think that also previously briefed the elements of area variance, what we have to show. We talked a lot about the community, the neighborhood community character, and last year submitted parcel access map showing the existence of a swimming pool at 630 Stanford Road. My orientation is correct. That's going to be to the north of Yadgard. There's another pool there. There's several other pools in the neighborhood that we showed on photographs in the immediate area. Again, towards undesirable change, will there be an undesirable change to the character of the neighborhood? You might remember there was a lot of discussion about the pool pump, and according to the manufacturer, this is the quietest pump on the planet. That's their words. There's different options about where that can go. From what I understand, before I got involved, in fact, that Mr. Yadgard is here. He's sitting in the back, by the way.
Yep.
There had been discussion of putting the mechanicals next to the house, which might not require a variance, but then not a bad idea. Someone thought, why don't you put it over in the shed or put it a little bit further away? That might require, there's some flexibility about that, I guess, if the board wants to talk about that some more.
Okay.
But there was a lot of consideration about the sound that might emanate from the pump. You might remember the client met with Millbrook Fence and talked about a fence. I think at one of the meetings he asked, how high can I put it? So obviously it'll be within code. And landscaping, of course, was agreed to and proposed to further lessen the impacts of visual impacts and noise. We talked a lot about whether there's some other way that we can achieve the desired swimming pool. So there's a lot of back and forth on this over the past year. The board was invited to go out. I think someone did from the board. I'm not sure who. At some point in time, someone from the board went out and visited the site. There was discussion, I think, proposed by a neighbor and the neighbor's architect that the pool could go in a raised area behind the house. The driveway comes in from the south and kind of comes around the back of the house, and the garage is underneath. There's all stone with mortar. There's some probably in some places probably 10, 12 feet high when you get around the back of the house. And in between that driveway, that U, is a small area where there's a patch of grass and some landscaping. And the idea was floated that perhaps the pool could go there. We had the Yadgard's pool contractor, Four Seasons. I met him out there wintertime this year to explore the idea. And, the answer to that is, of course, anything's possible. A beach is eroding in Nantucket. If you want to put your house back and put it up on stilts and spend millions of dollars, you can do that. So sure, you could take out that wall, support it up, but it makes no sense to have a pool there. There's a existing patio where this pool site we're now proposing is located. It's off of some slider doors where it keeps a grill. It would be cost prohibitive. Four Seasons looked at it and he said, sure, anything's possible, but you're talking about a major project doing something like that. So it isn't quite as easy as it seems. We talked about the substantial, the other factor is whether the requested area variances are substantial. Of course, you're saying they're not substantial. I think in particular, the one that impacts the neighbor who's in greatest seems to be in opposition to this more than anybody. That's the least substantial. That's 9%. The alleged difficulty being self-created. Here's what I would say to that. Of course, any one of these factors is not necessarily dispositive over the other, but the longer this is going on, I think the more one could say it's not self-created. You know, when we started this, there's a lot of discussion in the submissions about conversations Mr. Gadgard and neighbors had before he purchased the property. Well, you know, like a lot of people moving into a new neighborhood, he had his attorney at the time. He had real estate brokers. He's had a conversation with the building department. All of them saying, look, we can't tell you you're going to get a variance, but people get variances. I'm paraphrasing it, but that's essentially what he was told. The process began, as you know, and due to some procedural error, that completely had to be retracted, and there's a hole in his backyard where there was going to be a pool. So, you know, on the self-created element of an area variance, we think that certainly as time is going on here and through no fault of his own, it's become less and less self-created. That's the application, and we're hoping that the board would, I'm sure you're going to hear public comment tonight, but and after 25 months, we're hoping to get a vote.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
At this point, I would make a motion to open the public hearing. In favor?
Aye.
Before I ask for public comments, I want to acknowledge receipt of a 10-page letter with exhibits from Alan Rapplier, who's representing Mr. and Mrs. Cornell, next door neighbors. And we also received a letter from the owners of 604 Stanford Road, Eileen and Peter Ware. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's a letter in opposition to the Yadgard application. Both of those will be part of the record this evening for this public hearing. With that out of the way, is there anybody that wishes to speak for or against the application? Absolutely.
Thank you. All before I'm Alan Rapley, I represent the Cornells. The document that was submitted to the board, I dropped 5 copies off.
Use the microphone.
Oh, sorry.
It's
And I also emailed it to your attorney and Josh at the same time. So not the same time, but as soon as I walked back. So
That's your letter dated October 10th you're talking about?
correct.
Yep.
Yep. Well, that was, I think, Friday. And with the board's indulgence, I just want to sort of, Josh started with, it's been 25 months. And I think that 25 months ago, 2 of the gentlemen that are here tonight were not on the board. I think Frank was. Tate, I'm not sure if you were. You were? Okay. No, it was 2 years ago.
Oh,
It was 2 years ago. So I think that history is important. So it's probably as good a place to start. And the Cornells, Lee and Jim are here with me, and you may have noted that they're always here. They've come to every meeting, either through Zoom or with me. This is really important to them. We were not here in September because what happened was we looked online and just so you know, it said there's no meeting.
Huh.
So I'm going to give you a copy of that. It may just be a technological problem that you have, but Jim and Lee and I all looked to come to the meeting and it said canceled due to lack of new applications. So we didn't come to the meeting. I understand a meeting was held. I understand that's when you decided to proceed with a public hearing. I just want the board to be aware of that we did want to attend. We didn't blow it off because it wasn't important, but
It's understandable.
we just didn't know based on that publication.
Okay.
So history. I'm going to go back very far, even before 25 months, because you guys know that these folks are neighbors, and the Cornell's property in 2020, in early 2022, they applied for a number of variances to extend their garage, extend the deck. And what happened was the then owner of the property, now the Yadgard property, a gentleman named Mr. Jansen. Mr. Jansen appeared and had strong feelings about extending the garage that close to his house would impair its value and, essentially disrupt his peace and quiet. So, and this is one of the exhibits that I attached. That variance application, the board did not proceed with. It was crossed out and essentially denied. The Cornells were not going to get that. Go ahead, Frank.
I was going to say, I was at that meeting and
Yeah.
they withdrew that part of their application.
And I think, is it fair to say because of the vibe of the neighbor, feeling it would affect value, and they didn't really want contention with their neighbor. So that,
Possible. I don't know what the reasoning was, but I knew that the Cornells withdrew that part of their application. Right.
that was their reasoning. So fast forward a little bit, the property gets placed on the market and gets sold to Mr. Yadgard. Prior, and this is exhibit, one of the exhibits, prior to the sale, in exhibit 2, I believe, Mr. Yadgard sends the Cornells an email and indicates to them he realizes how close it is. He uses the words proximity, that he has not entered the contract, but that a pool is a must. The Cornells in February of 22 say, thanks, but we really would be opposed to a pool being that close to our home. So Josh's point about self-creation, there really isn't any doubt that it was entirely self-created, because the applicant understood that there was opposition from their neighbor, understood that it was in proximity to their home, understood that the man that he bought the property from felt strongly that in addition to the Cornell property would impair the value of his home, which is why the Cornells withdrew it, and nevertheless proceeded because, in his words, a pool is a must. So the issue about the hole in the ground, and this is definitely something that I think is a little misunderstood in the record. In fact, in AKR's memo on page 2, they refer to litigation. So let me explain that litigation to you, because I think there's a perception that the Cornells are hair trigger litigants and just like suing people. That's not what happened. Here's what happened. The Yadgards came in for variance applications. No neighbors were given any notice. The board at the time was represented by Sarah Wilson. When Jim heard excavation going on, now Jim and Lee had told, his name escapes me at the moment, the former building inspector, James Finley. Jim, if there's any application next door, can you just let us know? Fine. Jim Finley doesn't tell them anything. Kevin Eiserman is digging. Jim Cornell goes over and says, hey, you probably shouldn't dig. We didn't know about this hearing and we're opposed to the pool. That doesn't stop. Jim sends an email to Mr. Yadgar and says, hey, we ought to let you know you're digging. We didn't get any notice for the variance, and really that wasn't really fair to us. Fine. I reach out to the town and say, guys, hold the phone. A building permit should be revoked or suspended because no neighbor got notice. Fine. As you probably know, there's a 30-day statute of limitations for Article 78. We're probably on day 26 when that happens. The town does not revoke the permit. They had to, I believe, Frank, they had to pull all you guys together. But by the time that happened, the statute of limitations had already expired. So we had to file to protect their rights. After we did that, the town and the Yadgards agreed to vacate the permit. So AKR describes that as litigation. That their description is, when the project was first presented to the ZBA in October 22, the ZBA granted the relief requested at that time, and the applicant obtained a building permit and work commenced. However, due to ongoing Article 78 challenge, I find it probably not reasonable to say the permit was granted without notice to any neighbor, and maybe the board should understand that when this summary is given. Furthermore, the town, through Ms. Wilson, would not revoke the permit during the statutory period. So really, you didn't have much of a choice. Finally, the consultant did not advise the board that it needed a coverage variance. So the variances that they did have were incomplete in any event. So history-wise, gang, the Yadgards understood this would be an issue. They understood their neighbor created the same issue for the Cornells, understood that no notice had been given to the Cornells, understood they didn't have a coverage variance, understood that the Cornells asked them to stop digging, but they kept digging. So that's why the hole is there. Now, the town website, I didn't realize this until Mr. Cornell pointed it out to me. The town website has really, I don't know who wrote it, but it's very good, whoever wrote it. On page 4, when it talks about ZBA applications, It has a great guide. It's one of the best guides I've ever seen about area variances. And what it starts out with is the applicant needs to make a showing rather, of unnecessary hardship. I've looked in the application. There is no showing of any hardship, let alone an unnecessary hardship. And I think it's fair to say we probably all know what hardship means, but I looked it up because, lawyers look stuff up. And one of the definitions was a severe suffering or privation. I take that to mean, somebody has a health issue or a severe health issue or something that really their life requires. And there's a case that I cited on page 1 and 2 of the letter that I sent you that is a comparable pool case. And the court essentially said a pool is not a hardship. Needing a pool is not a hardship. You don't even get to the 5 standards until you establish that you have a hardship. There's nothing in this record to suggest there is any kind of hardship. And in fact, the application lacks a statement of hardship. So I think you have to start at that point. Not, it's been 25 months. I really need the pool. There's been no showing whatsoever. The end of that, page 4, even talks about, and we'll go through these, but if the applicant did not satisfy every one of these standards, the variance must be denied by the Zoning Board of Appeals. This is not, I didn't create this. This is on the town's website. And it's page 4 of the subject mark, area variance application. So I think I've sort of covered the first of the standards in my letter is, was the difficulty self-created? Undoubtedly it was. I appreciate Josh's argument that perhaps it's, time has passed. The passage of time doesn't dilute the self-creation issue at all. The second issue is are the variances substantial? So Josh indicated that there were 3. There are 4 variances. And this is what they total. The rear yard variance is 46%. The side yard variance is 48.5% for the pool equipment. The side yard variance for the pool is 10%. The coverage variance, your consultant indicates that it's 2.6%. Respectfully, that's not correct math. There isn't any doubt, there isn't any dispute that what's on site is approximately 7,500 square feet. Appendix B talks about how many more square feet it can be. If this pool is built, there's going to be 9,500 square feet. The fact that some of it is non-conforming doesn't excuse compliance with Appendix B. So while it's true constitutionally, if something is non-conforming, I'm not conceding this is, but if something is non-conforming, you can't tell somebody they can't do it, can't take away. But when they open that up and say, we want to add more, the appropriate measuring point is not non-conforming versus what we want to add. It's what the Schedule B permit and what do they want to have. And I'm not great at math, but I believe it's 26%. Not, it's a 2,000 square foot differential over 7,500 square feet. It's 26%. So what does that leave us with? 4 variances out of a total of 5 that you could need to be there. The only one they don't need is on the Lehrer side. We now know the Lehrers, or 100% of the neighbors affected by this application, are opposed to this application. You have 3 sides. The Lehrers own on 2, the Cornells own on the other. The Lehrers, I did see the letter myself, it was forwarded to me, say you can put it in a place where you don't need any variances. That's where you should put it. So we have, think about this site. Out of 5 possible variances, they need 4 of them. 2 of them are almost 50%. One's more than 25, one's more than 10. We secured an affidavit from Ken Holzberg, who used to be on the ZBA. I don't know if all you gentlemen know. I know Frank knows him. And basically, Ken looked at, and this is Exhibit 6 in the package, he looked at 392.5 of the code and basically said, we've never used that to grant a coverage variance. And I think the point that Ken was trying to make is that the ZBA, can't speak for it, but has probably never seen an application exactly like this. And here's why. Josh talked about there are pools nearby. There's two. The old Toad Hill property, now the Lear, is 4.1 acres. I did the measurements on parcel access. It didn't need any variances. It's 111 feet from one boundary and 118 feet from the other boundary. No variances. The other parcel is 7.7 acres. That's called the Lindsay's. No variances, not near boundaries. So we don't dispute there are pools. We do dispute that there is any pool on a parcel that's under 2 acres that's already over the coverage allowance in the town of Washington. And if there's evidence to the contrary, I'd love to see it. Because just saying there are pools, those pools are compliant with the code. We're comparing apples to oranges. This proposal is 80% out of compliance with the code. Now, undesirable change and effect on the neighborhood. Like, that's probably self-evident at this point that that's how the Cornells feel. I would submit to you that the other neighbor affected by it feels the same way based on their letter to the board. These two other pools, totally incomparable. If there's, Frank, you've been on the board a long time. If you can think of another pool that benefited from this kind of application, please, if it comes to mind, love to discuss it. We had submitted, when the first pool was proposed, way back when, a couple of years ago, Candy Anderson, one of the brokers, it's attached to our submission. I don't remember the exhibit number, gave us a letter, said it will definitely impact value. We weren't sure when this application would restart or if it would restart. When it did restart, when we saw online that actually a meeting was held, the Cornells hired Lee McEnroe and Maureen McGoldrick. You guys may know them. They're very well-known local appraisers. They spent a lot of time, and it's attached to the submission. It's Exhibit 4. They spent a lot of time, it's a 22-page report, looking at the impact this might have on the Cornell property. And they said a few things. I encourage you, if you don't have a chance, or if you haven't had the chance, please read it. But specifically on page 12, they talk about this notion in appraising. I know Kyle and I have had some tax cases together, so we know a fair amount about appraisers. But external obsolescence, and what that means in the appraisal lingo is there are external features that can affect you, and there's nothing you can do about them. They looked at 24 sales that were below market, and what they found was that the steepest discounts were those affected by external obsolescence. And their conclusion was that if this pool is built where it's proposed to be built, it will, the value of the Cornell property will deteriorate by 15%. And that's in bold on their conclusions on page 12. That aligns with exactly what Candy Anderson said. It doesn't give an exact number, but it doesn't take, frankly, in my view, great mystery to realize that it's going to impair their value. So sort of on the point of hardship, there's nothing in this record over the past 2 years that suggests that this will not be harmful to the Cornells. Now the record is clear that it will be financially harmful as well. And I would submit to the board that allowing variances to improve one value to impair another is not a precedent the board may be interested in setting. Now, in terms of other factors and how it affects the neighborhood, look, there's no pool there now. So we know the property can be enjoyed, and it was enjoyed for decades. There's no pool there now. You don't need a pool to live there. So the addition of a pool will bring light, noise, just more busyness to the site that's that close to somebody else's home. And it will impact those external and those environmental features. The Cornells also pointed out we have a very low well in this area. A lot of people on Stanford Road do. My sister, Susie Whalen, her well ran dry last year. They're about a mile away. Stanford Road is notoriously low water area. So if you're constantly filling a pool because the water is evaporating, that's a problem. The next standard, can the benefit be sought by other means or achieved by other means? And there's cases, and again, the town standards is right on. Point 2, whether the benefit sought by the applicant be achieved by some other method feasible for the applicant to pursue, other than an area variance. The alternative location would not require an area variance. Now, it's true, the driveway was built to circle around and go into the garage, but the driveway was built, which means earth was moved, rock was moved. It can be moved again. The driveway can be pushed out further. And I stress to the board, the applicant, and this is some of the cases we cited, the applicant must show this. The applicant must carry this burden. I called Willie Murphy. I've known Will a long time. I asked him, go look at the site. He provided an affidavit. It's Exhibit 8 in this. It's not a letter. It's a sworn affidavit. And Willie told me that he actually worked on this property in the 80s, finishing the siding. He said that the property had been enlarged several times, and whoever the contractor was didn't finish the job, so the owner at the time asked him to come out and finish, and he did. So what he said is, frankly, consistent with what Josh said, is it can be moved. And Josh didn't say it can't be moved. He said it can be moved. It might involve greater expense. There's no doubt about that, but it can be moved. And while it's more convenient for the Yadgards to have it in another location, convenience isn't one of the standards. It can be moved. And that's established by Willie. It's established by the applicant's attorney. Willie says specifically, and I highly encourage you to read his affidavit, that he's done excavation work for pools dozens and dozens of times, and he did all the excavation work for a pool company that is no longer in business. He gave me the name, but I forgot it. He was shown the alternative location. He was able to see that area. He pointed out that excavation had occurred, meaning where the hole was, and he says pretty clearly, you can put a pool in there. It might require some site work, but you can put a pool in that area. So the benefit, in fact, can be achieved by other means. It can be achieved by other means without any variances. It'll still need a coverage one, by the way. I shouldn't say any. It will still need a coverage variance in any case, but it will eliminate the side yard. It will eliminate the rear yard. That is supported by 100% of the neighbors affected by this application. Now, lastly, will it adversely affect the physical and environmental characteristic in the neighborhood? I don't think I need to repeat. That's in many ways kind of what I've already said to. Now, again, I want to go back and look at this town website. The last sentence of the whole thing. If the applicant does not satisfy each of the above mentioned criteria, the variance must be denied by the Zoning Board of Appeals. I would submit to the board that the applicant has not established one of the criteria, let alone 5. The applicant has not established any hardship whatsoever, which is necessary before you reach any of the criteria. Are there any questions? There's no bad questions. I'll do my best to answer whatever they are, good, bad, or indifferent.
The alternative site would be in the front yard of the house?
No, that's the backyard.
It's still the backyard?
Yes. I don't think you can put a pool in the front yard.
Okay. So is it safe to say that if they change locations, your clients might not be opposed to the pool being there?
I think that's very safe to say.
That's the only questions I have.
I don't have any questions.
Alex,
Yes.
the only question I have is.
Excuse me,
process.
Kyle. Hold on one second.
No, take your time.
I just think this is ringing loud. It's my wife calling. I'm not going to answer it. I just didn't want it to be loud. Shoot.
I see you have a stenographer that you brought for
Yes.
these proceedings. Do you have a request to submit the transcript of this evening as part of the record?
If the board would like it, sure. I mean, if they'd find it helpful.
I think it would.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know that you need to keep your hearing open for that reason, but
What I would do, we would just for that submission, for written submissions, perhaps, or like any written
Like 2
submissions.
weeks or something like
Sure.
that?
well, let me ask you a question. How quickly can that transcript be ready? Not to put you on the spot or anything, but
It can be as quickly as you tell me. I don't know how it works with the agency, but
I got
usually I think it's 8 to 10 business days on
Right.
a normal schedule.
Would you prefer it to be part of the record, Mr. Rappley?
I think everybody would prefer it be part of the record.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have an objection to it.
I have no objection. No objection.
Okay, is there anybody else that wish to speak for or against the application this evening?
Well, I'd just like to say a few words. As the,
Jim, why don't you come up? I don't move, yeah.
Certainly is the affected party here.
Sir, just start with your name and
Yeah,
address.
so, this is James Cornell, the owner of 620 Stanford Road, which is the property that's adjoining the Yadgor property. And just to reiterate what Alan said, when Jensen did object to our extension of our garage, he informed us that he was going to sell the house and was concerned that that extension would impair the value of the marketability of his property because it would get fairly close to
I
the
think
property.
around 4 feet, wasn't it?
Yeah. And we asked him, we said, can we landscape? Can we plant stuff there, pine trees or whatever? He said, no, I don't want it, anything that's going to, impair the marketability of the property and putting it up on the market. And he ended up doing so and selling it to the ag guards. And we understood that. I was on the planning board for 8 years. You might know that. I respect the code. I upheld the code during those 8 years. And I know it very well. So when this happened, and I understood that this was, would be it would impose a hardship on us. I knew it was going to impact our value. I did bring in Candy Anderson's letter, which was not, didn't monetize it. And so we did ask, get the most serious appraiser in Dutchess County, Leah McEnroe. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with her. She does, a great deal of work throughout Dutchess. And I was very surprised to see that she monetized it at, 15%. This is impacting our property value by $225,000.
Is your house on sale?
Is my house for sale? No,
Are you selling your house? Are you
No.
planning on selling it?
no, but it's impacting the value of it.
Well, it only
It would
impacts
impact,
the
no, it
extent you
doesn't. No, it's not true. It
sell it. Well,
impacts your value.
that's your, point.
That's,
I'm just trying to cut through the.
well, just saying, and it's not the talk, it's impairing value. So that's what they're
When you
saying.
sell it. I understand.
So, whatever. But that's the point, and I think it should be taken seriously,
I understand them.
right? I mean,
Your point was your neighbor was selling it. He told you he was selling the property.
right,
You
he
just,
was,
you got a. Anyway, that was my question. Yes.
I'm talking about impairment of the value. That's pretty clear cut. And what I'm saying is that there's no reason, this pool is not necessary. I mean, it's a pool that would be used in the summertime. We know this is not a year-round option for anybody. They want to put a pool in, and that's going to impair our value. And meanwhile, maybe it will improve the value of his property. I'm just saying that as a precedent, we were willing to withdraw our opposition, our application for the garage extension. And for the same reason that we're requesting that they withdraw, or you deny them variance for a pool that would have the same impact on our property value. That's all we're asking for. And I think this is as a person who's been living in this community 40 years, I don't think that's a big ask. So just wanted to leave you with that.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to speak for or against the application?
I just want to address, again, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Just a couple of,
Response to Alan's citation of the guide that's on the website, that's not the code, right? So that's on the website. It is what it is. It's a guide. And if you read the first paragraph on the second the third, 1, 2, 3, fourth page of the guide. Says in such statement of hardship, the property owner must address all the criteria below. So it actually tells you what the statement of hardship is. It's those 5 elements that are right there. This isn't something new. I'm a little bit troubled by the precedent of prior board members who themselves may have unclean hands coming forward and offering their testimony about what they did in their tenure as a ZBA member. I'm not sure that the board should rely on that, especially when he's talking about to the best of his recollection. Same thing goes with McEnroe's appraisal. She says, I encourage you to read it. Probably. She talks about the noises. She says that the pump and the noise from the pool probably would impact the Cornell. So there's a lot of qualifiers in that appraisal. Comparing the variances that were requested by the Cornells, 5 feet from the property line versus 90 feet from the property line, there is no comparison. Big difference. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Mackey.
Have you heard?
Absolutely. You want to give everybody a fair shot here.
Sorry. Josh is right. It's not new. It's exactly what the law's been for a long time, and all the cases say that. And the towns, on the town website, is just a very good summary of exactly what the cases say. That there must be a hardship, and you must hit all those criteria. And the burden is not on the neighbors. The burden is on you. The comment about unclean hands, no idea who he's talking about. I think that might be Ken Holzberg because Ken gave an affidavit. Unclean hands is a defense that's used usually to toss somebody out of court because they came and they did something rotten. That's not present here. I don't think anybody's engaged in that. The McEnroe appraisal by its very nature is an appraisal. It reaches conclusions. It says, this is what I think may happen, or this is I think may impair value. Compare that to the absence in the record of saying anything to the contrary. There's only one thing in this record. It will affect value. There's nothing saying it won't. And lastly, Josh is correct on the limited point of 4 feet. However, what he's forgetting is that of the variances they need 4 or 5 or 80% of what the code would permit, including 26% over. Mind you, no one disputed that. 26% over what's allowable in coverage. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? You guys have any comments or questions or anything for anybody that spoke?
No.
Okay. Well, what I'd like to do at this point is close the public hearing, except we'd be willing to accept the transcript from tonight's proceeding. You think can be done within 2 weeks?
So she works for
Babiar's, but it's
No,
somebody
it's
new.
not Babiar's.
It's somebody new now.
Yeah. So she's an independent reporter. She's saying she can't. I'll work it out with them. That it'll get
Okay.
the report in 2 weeks. I'll send Kyle a copy and I'll send Josh.
Okay. If we're waiting for the transcript, if either anybody for or against the application want to make one other submission within 2 weeks, we'll accept it. Other than that, I would move that we close the public hearing.
So Frank, can I be heard on that point, which is if more evidence is going to come in, then that's difficult because if the public hearing's closed, we can't comment.
You're right. We'll close the public hearing, subject only to receiving the transcript.
Thank you.
That would be my motion.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Just speaking for myself, there's a lot of legal issues that have been proposed by both sides. And I would like an opportunity at some point to have an executive session with our attorney to review those. In order to do that, I would move to adjourn this application to our November meeting.
I think that makes sense. I'll second that. I agree.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All right, so we closed the public hearing, subject to receive the transcript only. We'll put this on for the November agenda, Jennifer.
What's that date?
Good question.
It's the third Tuesday in November, so it would be
19th?
the 19th.
Yeah. So let me just just as, if I may, Mr. Chair, so if we get this transcript in a couple of weeks, I just want to caution everybody, it is theoretically possible that we are not prepared. And then also we're going to want to have an attorney. It's really, I think what you're proposing is an attorney-client meeting
Yes.
as opposed to executive session. So there may not be sufficient time at that point in time to be prepared to have a determination at the November meeting. So I think we'll shoot for it, but in the event that that doesn't happen, this may then get leaked over to December.
Right.
Just so everyone's aware that it's possible, we may,
We've got 62 days, right?
right from the close of the public. So
Right.
we've got plenty of time.
Yep.
So it may not be November. We're going to shoot for it, but if that doesn't happen, I'm sure we'll be back here in December to resolve this. If that suits the.
That certainly makes sense to me.
Does it make sense to calculate what 62 days would be so there's not any kind of default approval?
It wouldn't be a default approval anyway. Doesn't work that way in the CBA. It would, well, I'll discuss what it would be off the record.
Matter to me, I just don't want any argument.
No, it wouldn't be a default approval.
All right. Very good. I
All
think
right.
we're done here.
Very good, thanks.
Thanks Thanks everybody for coming out.
So the public hearing is open only for the submission of the transcript, closed for all other purposes.
Correct.
Very good.